Hi, good morning everybody. Today's lesson is on improving vocabulary and building up detail in your writing. This lesson builds upon your previous lessons that you've been working on about structuring paragraphs and how linking them together. So now that you understand how to kind of organize your writing overall, we can now work on vocabulary, building up detail, putting in things in those paragraphs as well to make some excellent writing. So your two objectives for today is to be able to use appropriate and interesting vocabulary and also to understand how to build up detail in your writing as well. So by the end of this, you should be able to use different and interesting words to make it more specific and better, but also to understand how and why to build up detail in your writing as well. Those are two things that you should be able to do by the end of this lesson. Your key words are throughout this lesson are going to be vocabulary, verb, adjective, and tone. And you should know hopefully what all of those means. Perhaps tone you're not too sure about, but I will clarify that later on in the lesson. Okay, so your little do now task. There's a very famous quote by Ludwig Wittgenstein called "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." I just want you to have a think about that quote for a minute, about what do you think that could mean. Yeah, it may sound a bit it may sound very posh or very sophisticated, but essentially, what Wittgenstein meant by this quotation was how we are able to describe our world and understand our world and our experiences depends upon the language and the vocabulary that we have. If we have a very limited vocabulary, then we can't really understand or describe our world very well. If we have a vast vocabulary bank, then we can greatly understand and greatly describe our world to its best. Okay, so really, this is why vocabulary is so important, because it helps you understand the world around you and express yourself all the better. Okay, it's a little food for thought there as well, and this is why this lesson is so important. Okay, so very specifically in English, the importance of vocabulary when it comes to our writing is quite important, because it does really two things. Okay, it helps you create a tone, and a tone is the feeling or the mood of a text. So sometimes it could be quite humorous, or it can be quite authoritative, or it could be quite angry, or it could be quite informative. Okay, so it's a feeling behind the text is what you're looking for. And that feeling comes out by the vocabulary that you use. Okay, so you may want to think about, your verb choices or how you structure your text. Okay, it's all about the tone that comes out basically. Your vocabulary is also really important for your audience as well. So you naturally speak differently to different people depending upon your circumstances. So the way I'm speaking to you right now is very different to how I perhaps may speak to my friends or to my son. Okay, so it's the vocabulary that we use that we have to adapt that for the audience. So just to look at things a little bit more, so thinking about vocabulary and how we can make it better. So read these two examples. There's example A and example B. So think about how are they different, and perhaps which one's better and why. Okay, so hopefully you had to be able to finish both of those. Okay, and they're almost the exact same. Okay, except for example A, it's correctly written in a way, all right, but it's very dull, it's very boring. The word nice is very generic. It's okay, but it doesn't really tell us a lot about the restaurant or the experience that this person had there. Okay, so it was a nice restaurant. The people were nice. The paint was nice. The food was nice. The waiters were nice. It's a very flexible word, but it's not very specific. Whereas example B, it's very specific and it makes it so much more interesting to read. We went to a great Indian restaurant. Okay, the waiters were friendly. It was a lovely shade of red. The food was tasty and delicious. The waiters brought us mince, which was good of them. I mean, you can even go through it again and change those words. So we went to a fantastic Indian restaurant. The waiters were very welcoming, okay? The walls were painted a beautiful shade of red, okay? And all of that would make it a much more interesting description. So if you think back to that Wittgenstein quote at the start of the lesson, this is where it shows the limits of your language. If you only rely upon the word nice and you describe everything as nice, it's really nice, it doesn't tell us a lot. It limits your understanding of what happened. It limits your world. Whereas if you have greater language or greater vocabulary, it is so much more enriching. Okay, so this is why we want you to vary your vocabulary. So there's a little activity in your exercise book, which is on page 76. Okay, and it is the first exercise. So you can pause the video now, complete the activity on page 76 about using the same words again and again. All right, so do that little activity and then you can check your work on page 112 when you're finished. All right, there's a little bit of support and challenge there at the end too. So if you got everything right, great. Do that little task. But if you didn't get it, if you had a few mistakes, there's a little activity there as well. So just pause the video now, complete that task. It should take you between 5 and 8 minutes. All right, you should have finished that task now. So just moving on to using more specific verbs now. So the first activity we looked at was thinking about adjectives. Okay, how we can vary adjectives in our descriptions. Okay, but you can also do the same thing for verbs. It is, look at this description here again. So I ran to the post box with a letter, then I ran to the shop for chocolate, and after that I ran home so I wasn't late for tea. Again, all of that is correct, and it's grammatically correct and okay, but think about when you change some of those verbs, okay, and what those verbs suggest. So I ran to the post box, then I hurried to the shop for chocolate, and I raced home so I wasn't late for tea. So if you think about it, there's an escalation kind of importance or speed in some of those verbs. So hurried is very different to ran. Hurried suggests that they were in a rush to do something, that they didn't want to be late for something. And then raced home, there's an element of competition for that, going really fast, okay, so that you're not late at all. So thinking about how you use your verbs as well is really important, okay? And there's loads of resources and everything else out there too to help you look at it. There's the thesaurus, and if you Google, there's loads of vocabulary bank worksheets and stuff out there on the internet as well. And here's some examples here as well. So, ran is the first example here, as well as, I bolted, I darted, I hurried, I scampered, I raced. Okay, all of those make it much more interesting as well. Even if you think about, the word said, when you read a novel and, he said, she said, they said, and when there's a dialogue going on and all you hear is said, that could be quite boring as well. I find that really difficult to read, and it makes me quite frustrated when I read that too. And there's so many other things you can say. They responded, they replied, they whispered, there's so many words you could use for that too. So varying your vocabulary, your verbs, makes it much more interesting, and it makes your description much more specific as well. They jabbered on, they mumbled, there's a lot. So really think about that too. But do remember as well, there's this over-reliance on the word very as well. So, it was very noisy in that room. You can say something like, it was deafening, it was a cacophony of noise, think about that. So really try to avoid the word very in your writing as well. It's easy for us to rely on it because it qualifies something as well, but think about how you could be more specific as well. And I just want to point to you this little quotation as well about, using very specific verbs as well. If you just say they walked across the room, if you start to say they tiptoed instead of walked, suddenly the reader's attention is laser focused on each movement, sound, and description as well. And if you read perhaps like a children's book, if you have like small children around the house as well, and if you look at some of their books and you read some of their stories, you know, the writer's use of verbs in there is very specific too. You know, monsters tiptoeing or creaking upstairs, you know, and it makes it so much more interesting, and it laser focus on what that character is doing as well. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're doing this activity, please. So task 2, again, on page 76, I would like you to pause the video now, and I would like you to complete that activity about using more interesting verbs. And again, you can check your work on page 112 at the end when you've finished. And again, there's a bit of like challenge and support there too, if when you check your work afterwards. Okay, so we're now going to upscale it even more. So we've worked on adjectives and we've worked on verbs as well, but we really want to be using like interesting and ambitious vocabulary. And this is what you need to be doing to really make your work stand out amongst all the rest, really, and to make it engaging for the reader as well. You know, make it a delight for the reader to read as well. So this is often called kind of like clever words or fancy words as well. Um, you know, kind of word like wow words is sometimes what we call them as well. So if you look at these examples, the first one, you know, City played badly on Saturday. So that adverb, you know, could easily change badly to lamentably on Saturday. And you kind of go, ooh, that's an interesting word they've used there. And the same thing with the um, adjective here in the second example. The pitch was in poor condition. It's all right. It's a good. Um, it's okay. But you could say the pitch was in an atrocious condition. Okay, still means the same thing. It just means it is an absolutely horrible state. And then the last one here, really sorry you can't see this. So the referee made some very stupid decisions. Okay, so very stupid. Again, we want to try to avoid the word very, but you can say the referee made some exceedingly moronic decisions. Okay, that tells us a lot more about the referee, that they didn't know what they were doing. They were really, really dumb in their decisions as well. And it was kind of throughout. Okay, so think about your adverbs and your adjectives and your adjective phrases as well, and really avoiding that word very. Okay, but a word of warning about using interesting and ambitious vocabulary. Please know what they mean before you use them, okay? I know that sometimes a dictionary and a thesaurus, you know, it could be a great source of help, but it can be a little bit complicated. But please do try to understand what the word means before you use it, okay? So you want to use these words sparingly. Okay, you don't want to overuse these fancy words. Okay, it makes you sound really daft and sounds really unnatural. And like one of the best examples I thought of was from Friends, which some of you guys may watch, and Joey, who's very dumb. You overuse this thesaurus, and it completely changes the meaning of a very small comment, a very small phrase about Monica and Chandler. Okay. And that's what we want you to avoid. Okay, please don't do a Joey and overuse the thesaurus. Okay, use it sparingly. All right. So task 3, please, on page 76. All right, pause the video now. Do that activity on using more interesting verbs. Please check your work on page 112 at the end when you're finished. And again, some support and challenge there if you need a little bit more. Fantastic. So I'd like you to kind of think about those 3 tasks that you've done now. All right, so by then we're finished with the first outcome. So can you use different and interesting words now to make your writing better and more specific? Okay, if you've aced it all, fantastic. Maybe you want to keep building upon that vocabulary, signing up to perhaps something like a word of a day from Oxford English Dictionary. You find some really interesting words there too. You may not use them in your everyday life, but knowing them, you may start to be able to apply them. If you got most of them correct, great, well done. Okay, go back and check where you were not, some of the words you're not sure on. Maybe you want to use the thesaurus. Maybe you want to pick up 2 or 3 words you could have done better. Okay, and if you did have some trouble with it, don't worry. Okay, you do have a thesaurus nearby. When you write, check your words carefully, read through your work. Try not to use the same word all of the time. Okay. Very good. It is a skill, and remember, it is okay that we're not like 100% all the time. It's a skill, and it's a skill that we need to practice. Okay? So, including more detail in your writing, this is what I really want to focus on as well, because sometimes we as teachers will read your work and we're kind of left wanting a bit more. You know, tell us a bit more about this, or develop this idea in more detail. And it may make you guys really frustrated, but we as readers, we have an incomplete picture. I like to think of writing as a bit like painting. So you want to paint a whole picture for your reader. An incomplete picture leaves us asking questions, or it feels incomplete. Okay? So we need to develop this skill a little bit more so that we have a whole picture for us to look at. So let's think about this in practice. So looking at the short extract and thinking about vocabulary and what we just worked on, what does this extract do well? And what do you think could be better? So the train journey was excruciating. When I went to buy my ticket, I could tell the person serving me did not want to be there. He was grumpy and gruff and barely spoke to me. The train I got on was dilapidated and uncomfortable. During the whole journey, the ancient train carriage rattled and shook, and fumes of diesel seeped in through the carriage, choking me the whole time. Barely anyone else is on the train, only an older woman and 2 teens playing video games loudly on their phones. So an interesting, nice little start to a description. And there are some interesting vocabulary that's used in there. So building upon what we did before, it's excruciating, dilapidated, ancient, seeped. All of those words, kind of make me as a reader, kind of stand up and go, wow, and tells us a lot about this experience. Okay, but there's hardly any detail in the description as well. So just as a quick task, think about it, like do a little mind map. What do you think are 3 things that could have been developed more? Okay, to make this more interesting and more thorough. So just pause for a minute, mind map, make a few notes. What are some things that could have been developed in more detail? Okay. So there's loads that we could have worked on here and included. So for the train itself, could have said a lot more about it, what it looked like, what it smells, where was it going, the colors it had, what type of train it was. We could have easily talked about the other passengers. What did the old woman look like? What did she have? What do you think was going on with her? What sounds from the video games were coming from the teenagers? What did they look like? Was it a boy and a girl? Was it 2 girls? Was it 2 boys? Lots of stuff there. The man selling tickets at the counter, why do you think he's grumpy? What did he look like? What did his voice sound like? Even though he said very little, we could have used some interesting adjectives there and vocabulary to describe that voice. What did he have? What did he do to be so dismissive? Did he grunt? Did he just wave his hand? But also the narrator as well. So where were they going? Why? How long was the journey for? What did they look like? What were they wearing? There's so much more that could have been developed there. This one paragraph could have been probably developed into 2 or 3 paragraphs even. Okay. So how do we include more detail? So what do I have to do, miss? So these are some easy ways that you can include more detail in your writing, whether it's descriptive writing or whether it is transactional writing or non-fiction writing like letters or arguments or articles. So one way is to focus on the five senses in descriptive writing. It is one of the easiest ways to build up detail. Zooming in on detail too. So some of your teachers may use this drop, zoom, shift technique, and it's dropping yourself into a scenario, describing what's there, zooming in on detail, like really kind of zoom in like a microscope on something, and then shift your focus to something else. So if I was describing my backyard, I could describe the backyard. I could zoom in on perhaps a bird in the tree chirping away, or a squirrel, trying to find some seeds. And then I could shift my focus perhaps to the bees buzzing around, or a cat tromping through the grass. Okay, so drop, zoom, shift is a really easy way to kind of build up that detail as well. And using because or but or so or any other connective in your writing as well. And that's particularly important in transactional writing, like non-fiction writing, or in your essays as well. I often say, use because to explain that idea a bit more, to answer how or why. Okay, so that's important. You're describing kind of the what to me. Okay, then say kind of how and why. So that's really important in trying to build up detail too. So when you write, particularly with descriptive writing, you should be aiming to write about 2 to 4 sentences about a particular thing. I could easily write 2 to 4 sentences perhaps about that bird in a tree, or a squirrel trying to find some seeds in the grass. Okay, you want to paint that whole picture for the reader. You want to ensure that they have a real understanding and clarity in their head when they're reading your work. Okay, so I'd like you to do a little task now. So this should take you perhaps about 20 to 30 minutes, perhaps, depending on your experience. Okay, so look outside your window, it could be any window in your house, and describe what you see. Okay, if you don't want to do that, maybe you want to describe this image here on the left. Okay, describe it in detail and with interesting vocabulary. So think about all the things you've learned in this lesson, avoiding the repetition of the same word, using more specific verbs, okay, building up detail, using ambitious and interesting vocabulary. Those are things that we're working on. So your success criteria is listed there. Aim to write 2 to 4 paragraphs. Include the 5 senses. Try that drop, zoom, shift technique. Use because, but, or so, or other connectives perhaps to extend those ideas. Think about perhaps your sentence structures. That'll be a further lesson. Okay? Think about why or how. Okay? And that vocabulary. Don't be afraid to use a thesaurus and to use a more interesting word, but just make sure you understand the meaning of it and what it suggests as well. So if you're struggling to start, maybe think about that sentence starter there. Everything has changed, whether that's your view outside your room or this picture. Use the success criteria as a checklist, and try to have a thesaurus at hand as well. And aspire, really try to think about the tone of writing that you want to create. Okay? So if you want to pause for 20 to 30 minutes now to complete that task, do a little mind map if it helps. All right, and then come back to this video when you're finished. All right, well done, guys. Okay, so at the end of this lesson now, you guys have worked very hard, I'm sure. So can we now understand how and why to build up detail in your writing? So have a read through your work against the success criteria that you had, that was on the last slide. Okay, did you include a wide range of detail? Fantastic. All right, if you want a bit of a challenge, try rewriting that now with a different tone. So if you created kind of a very bitter tone, very suspicious, maybe think about trying it in a happy tone, optimistic tone. Okay, and that could be really interesting because you have to change your vocabulary a little bit, maybe on what you focus on and why. And if you generally included a range of detail, well done, guys. Okay, you've met the objective as well. So how do you think you could improve it though? Go back through your work, try to edit it more for vocabulary that makes an impact. Maybe add about 3 more phrases of more description and detail. And if you had trouble with this, okay, don't worry as well. Again, it's a skill that needs to be developed and worked on. Okay, so maybe pick out 2 things you wrote about and add 1 more sentence in there to give you more detail. So think about the senses, zooming in on detail, okay? And using maybe because to extend that idea a little bit more, okay? Well done, guys. Okay, so remember to tune in next week. There will be another lesson as well, and you'll be asked to apply all of these skills in your next assessment task, okay? Thank you very much. Hope you guys are all happy and well. Bye-bye.